Hello friends, from 1600s to 1950, 60 to 70% of all major inventions were done by Protestant Christians. Now that's a huge number. My grandma used to tell my mum that the reason the West is so advanced is because they are Christian. Now that seems like a simplification, a generalization, but could that be actually true if 60 to 70% of all people, of all major inventions from the 1600s to 1950 were by Protestant Christians? And the number is also very high when it comes to those who have received scientific prizes for inventions and other things in the field of science. They were overwhelmingly Protestant. The next big demographic is Jews too. And what do they have in common? Access to the Bible. And that is a huge thing that led to the advancement of the West. And even Jews share in that blessing too, because their biblical knowledge played a role as well in them getting ahead. But take this for example. In the Dark Ages, Catholics did not want the Bible to be translated into the common language, but Protestants wanted the Bible to be translated into the common language so that as much people as possible could be able to read it, which then led to people having to be taught how to read and then able to comprehend and read the Bible. And so you have one group of people that wants to shackle the Bible to the church wall, to put it that way, and not allow the common people to understand it, versus those who wanted to spread the Bible and literacy all across Europe. And it was those people, it was that group of people that became successful scientifically. Now, if you have a population of people who are uneducated, unable to read, then by default, it's not hard to deduce that there will be no scientific advancement. But when they have people who are able to read, who are literate, and that major impetus coming from the Bible, so then you learn logical reasoning and textual reasoning and all the rest of it that goes along with understanding the biblical text. You learn about poetry, you learn about history, you learn about moral principles, you learn about all these different things, prophecy, revelation in the Bible. You learn these things, stimulates the mind, and people come up with a heck of a lot of great stuff. And so is the Bible anti-science? No. The trend historically is that the majority of people who did scientific inventions and who excelled in the scientific field were Protestant Christians. Not many people know this, but Isaac Newton, who is pretty much revered in scientific circles, most of the stuff he wrote was of a religious nature, not a scientific nature. He was very interested in religious themes. And so there's a shared link between the success of the West and the imposition of the Bible. These things link together. And so let's go back to the old statement. My grandma would say to my mum, the reason the West is ahead is because they are Christian and they read their Bible. That was the statement, and I think it's absolutely true. It's a simplified statement, but it's absolutely true. Now, in terms of culture, what is the strength of the Bible? Morality. Morality is a big theme that it's a theme that crosses the entire text. So the Jews are a central part of this, and they're in slavery, and they need to be taken from slavery and brought into freedom, and they need to secure their freedom from Pharaoh, the totalitarian oppressor. And so where does the repugnance for dictatorship and totalitarianism and the need for democracy and rights come from in the West. If you were to look at a document now, you're looking around and you're looking in the library and you say, which document is the foundation by which the freedoms of the West were developed and the abhorrence for totalitarianism developed? Which document? How's about the one that if you read, you would be burnt to death? The Bible, which was burnt en masse in many parts of Europe, and its people who read it were burnt too. That's how dangerous people, the powers that be, thought it was. And so not only do you have a narrative in the Bible of people oppressing God's people, not letting them worship God freely, but you have that literally playing out in Europe, where people want to worship God freely according to the dictates of their conscience, but you get burnt if you even try to read the Bible for yourself and aren't in communion with Rome. So logically, you then have the principle of separation of church and state developing. You have the principle of freedom of conscience developing. You have the principle of universal education developing. And then you say to yourself, what, the West just came up with this stuff because they were atheistic and they were running away from religion? No way. No way. It was the religious mule that bore the burden of the back of the philosophical, moral, and scientific developments that occurred in Europe. The Christian mule, the biblical mule, the one that people laugh at now and say that, oh, it's all fairy tales and stuff like that. No. So that's from the Bible. That's how the Bible managed to inspire universal rights and separation of church and state and abhorrence for dictatorships, and the shared narrative of man being made in the image of God meant that everyone had dignity. Thus you have the statement, all men are created equal, not evolved, created equal, and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, not from the government, it's by the Creator. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That comes from the Bible. That comes from the biblical narrative. You can't separate that from Western civilization and Judeo-Christian civilization. And then you have people like Jesus who talk about, loving your neighbor as yourself and challenging oppression, whether it's Roman oppression by crucifying people, whether it's religious oppression by burdening people with man-made traditions and exactions, which Jesus frequently spoke against, by the way. He says, teaching for doctrines and commandments of men, you hypocrites. So you have this challenge to the ecclesiasty of the time by Jesus. You have the theme of liberation from slavery to freedom. You have these things happening. And then you have the Protestant Reformation. What was that? Liberation so that people can be free to worship God with their conscience, according to the dictates of their conscience, to read the Bible for themselves, and challenge of the ecclesiastical powers of the time, which led to Western civilization, which led to the formation of the United States of America, and why it has been so successful. That is the history. And it's absolutely vital that we don't forget it.